It's based on nothing except cost to us. I mean, maybe there's a couple of words about, you know, I don't like civilian casualties. But it's very hard to find any principled opposition in the culture, in the intellectual culture generally. And it's also true of things that go way back. And so take the Vietnam War. There's been, you know, reams of material on that. But try to find a principled criticism of it in the mainstream. If you look at the literature of, say, diplomatic history today, or anything that goes way back, you find two positions. They're the hawks, who say, with more force we could have won, and they're the doves who say it was a lost cause, which was a mistake. Say, take Arthur Schlesinger, who's a leading American historian, Kennedy advisor, one of the most outspoken doves. It did become, he was a strong supporter of the war under Kennedy to the extent that he paid any attention to it at all. In fact, he paid almost no attention to it, even though Kennedy did directly attack South Vietnam and carried out many atrocities. But if you look in Schlesinger's journals, which just appeared, an almost day-to-day record of everything he did, there isn't even a mention of Vietnam until the Johnson years. There's a lot about swimming pools and who jumped in naked and that sort of thing, but nothing about Vietnam. But by 1966, 67, he was, like others, becoming critical of the war. And he wrote a book which is considered one of the important criticisms of the war. It's called Bitter Heritage. And he was very explicit, nothing hidden. He described his controversy with his friend Joseph Alsop, a major journalist who was a strong supporter of the war. And Schlesinger said something like this. She said, "We all pray that Mr. Alsop is right, and that with more force, the surge of the day, we will be able to win victory in a land of wreck and ruin, with everything destroyed and so on and so forth. That's what we all pray, but it probably won't work." And then he said, if Mr. Alsop is right, and we do win victory in this devastated land, we will all be praising the wisdom and statesmanship of the American government. And that wasn't ironic. He meant it, And yes, that's the attitude of liberal doves. That's why when U.S. casualties decline in Iraq, people say, well, maybe it really was a success. Okay, killed 1 million people, drove millions out of the country, destroyed the society, left it as a total ruin. Okay, but not too many American casualties, and the big problem is they're not doing what we say. There is mass nonviolent resistance in Iraq. It's actually a major triumph of nonviolent resistance, has compelled the invaders to back down from their, at least in words, we don't know if they'll live up to it, from their major goals. Okay, but who describes things that way? Where can you find a principled criticism? And this is not a critique of the press, because the press are reflecting the educated culture. They're reflecting the mentality of Harvard, MIT, Yale, and so on. That's the culture from which they come. And I think the reporting is very accurate. In fact, a large part of what I've written is actually defense of the press for its professionalism and objectivity. You may know of a book that Edward Herman and I wrote called Manufacturing Consent, which is about the media. There's a lot of condemnation of the book, but nobody looks at it. This is material you're not allowed to look at. It doesn't keep the party line. But a large part of it, if anybody wants to look at it, is a detailed analysis of media coverage of the Tet Offensive. Tet Offensive is a crucially important event. And after the Tet Offensive, Freedom House, great defender of freedom, published 2 thick volumes denouncing the press for their lack of patriotism, because they didn't report the Tet Offensive in a manner glorifying the United States sufficiently. Straight out of Stalinist Russia, that's Freedom House. 2 volumes, one of commentary, one of documents. And they claimed the volume of commentary, condemned the press for being on the side of the Viet Cong and hating America and, all the usual stuff. And then there was the volume of documents that's supposed to back it up. Well, I carried out the heinous act of actually reading the documents. The volume of documents completely refuted everything that they said in the volume of commentary, line by line. If you want details, look at the book. We went through it, and we concluded that contrary to the Freedom House Stalinist-style attack, the press was very courageous, competent, accurate. People described what they said, but entirely within the framework of U.S. doctrine, you know, U.S. propaganda. So, like, everything we're trying to do was right and noble, but, you know, we just had to destroy half the place because what choice do we have? But it's described accurately. Now, it's interesting that the media hated that defense of their objectivity and professionalism. They would much rather be portrayed the way Freedom House portrayed them in its Stalinist-style attack, as traitors, you know, challenging authority, and so on and so forth. They like that. What they don't like is you're doing your job very competently and courageously, but you're completely subservient to propaganda and the party line. Nobody likes that. So that part of the book can't be read. But yeah, I think it's generally true. And I think those are the reasons. I mean, there are other reasons too, like the media, after all, are big corporations, you know, selling a product, audiences to other corporations. That surely has an effect, and so on. I forget which side.
You've said a lot about sources that you've cited versus propaganda from various governments, and I imagine that a lot of the propaganda is written to look very similar to what you're citing as appropriate sources and to act like facts. And my question is, how do you personally differentiate between facts and facts? Like, how do you decide what you want to trust?
Are you an MIT student?
Yes.
Okay, so you've taken science courses.
Yes.
How do you decide what to believe? And it's the same in this case. You know, you don't believe every paper you see in the journals because some of them don't seem to make sense. And if they don't, you look back and see whether their data are correct and are the sources right. Was the doctor who wrote it in the pay of the drug companies and so on and so forth. Sure, and it's the same here. You just use the normal common sense that you use when you act as a scientist. I mean, it's a little different in the case of public affairs than science. I mean, Mother Nature is a hard taskmaster, but she doesn't purposely put up barriers in the way of understanding, okay, as when you're reading, say, the press or academic work and so on. But it's pretty, on the other hand, it's a lot easier in the case of public affairs because it's all on the surface. You know, there's no theories to speak of. I mean, try to find a theory in international relations theory. What's called a theory is laughable. You read just what's called just war theory. I could go through details if you like, but what it comes down to is I believe. You know, that's the way every argument runs. So it's all on the surface. Everything that I talked about today is on the surface. You can check it. It's just, you know, like bare data. If you don't think it's right, look it up. That's why I continually said verify it. Very simple. You'll find plenty of propaganda, like a couple of examples that I read. But you can also find the facts, and you can make your own mind. It's way easier than in the sciences in that respect, though harder in that you have to overcome barriers. But there's no special tricks. In fact, you know them all if you've taken science courses.
Professor Chomsky, good afternoon. In your opinion, what is the responsibility of the Arab League?
The responsibility of who?
The Arab League. The Arab countries, particularly the neighboring countries like Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and even the oil-producing countries like Saudi Arabia. And going back to Lebanon, why do you think Hezbollah hasn't took any action, firm action yet, either like tactical action or, I mean, they just stuck to speeches? Thank you.
Well, with regard to Hezbollah, I mean, I'm not privy to their internal thinking, but I can guess that the reason they're not reacting is they know if they do, Lebanon gets turned into a charnel house. Remember, Israel has I'll repeat what I said.